Quite suddenly, in the months prior to her 11th birthday, Jaka grew nearly 6 inches in height. Her feet, which she had seldom noticed, seemed overlarge to her, and were forever catching on the edge of carpets or getting tangled up together. Her neck, all of a sudden, seemed to her impossibly long and freakishly narrow. Her face appeared unnaturally thin to her, and she noticed that her ears stuck out from her head at different angles. Her nose was too big, and her nostrils flared in a manner she found most unbecoming. Whereas previously, at the evening meal, she had ignored most of those fragments of conversation drifting about her, narrowing the focus of her attention to the food on the plate before her, to the exclusion of all else, she now started visibly at the sound of laughter, her eyes darting this way and that, like those of a trapped fawn. In each sotto voce whisper she felt certain she heard her name, and in each smile and glance condescension, if not outright mockery. And when, on one of those occasions, Jaka accidentally tipped over her glass with one impossibly long arm, for the second time in as many courses, and Nurse, the very soul and substance of sensitivity, declaimed her loudly and generally as a clumsy great beanstalk, it became, alas, altogether too much for a very, very young woman to bear. Great swollen tears sprang unbidden to the corners of her eyes, burning briefly at the tender underside of her pupils before rising precipitously to underlid's edge and plunging cheekward, then chinward, at last freeing themselves from the centre of humiliation, burrowing their way gratefully into the starched linen of the tablecloth, even as Jaka's bony shoulders began to hitch, then to heave, then to vibrate in sympathetic and mournful concert with the low, plaintive cry which, by embarrassed fits and humiliated starts, now rose from a throat strangled and self-aware, much to the genuine astonishment of Nurse, who still viewed Jaka as being more than slightly retarded. So abrupt and so pitiful was Jaka's reaction, so heart-wrenching had been that wounded animal cry etched in patterns of plaintive self-loathing, that even Nurse, for once, was moved to a feeling very nearly resembling sympathy, and for several days thereafter was as silent and staring as a young charge, having decided the short rest from the stories of her young girls might be just the thing to avert any unseemly outburst of a like kind. Jaka was still afraid to enter the hidden world, certain that the door, once closed behind her, would lock, trapping her forever. She contented herself with gazing at the other door, slightly ajar, a dozen steps distant. If she speculated on the interior of the room, closet, hallway, beyond, it was no longer a gaudy fantasy filled with gems, jewels, and precious metals. She pictured instead a room very like the hallway, unkempt and dirt-streaked, a history preserved and forgotten, ignored and very much at peace, a tranquil retreat within the pristine and bustling confines of the executive mansion. To Jaka, the room was already hers.